Okay, this is lesson 511 for 5th grade. It is explaining the equivalent fractions rule. And basically the equivalent fractions rule is that we can find equal or equivalent fractions with one simple step. I'm going to use the fraction 4/5 as an example. That rule pretty much goes like this. If you multiply the numerator, the top number, by the denominator, or excuse me, if you multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same thing, doesn't matter what it is, we're going to pick the number 3. If you multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number, you will get an equivalent or equal fraction. So in this case, 4 times 3 equals 12. 5 times 3 equals 15. That means 4/5 is equal to 12/15. Okay, so this entire lesson mostly is centered around finding equivalent fractions. Now, for the first part, we actually sidestep a little bit. We're still talking about equivalent fractions, but they're building you up to it. They want you to find whether each number story, in this case, whether we're looking at greater than, less than, or equal to between two sets of numbers. One thing we want to keep in mind here is when we say 5 times a half, that's also like saying, what is 1/2 of 5? Of and multiply or times are interchangeable in this instance. A half times 5 is the same as a half of 5, and vice versa. We can switch it around. So we should be able to know right offhand that half of 5 is going to be less than 5, right? So in this case, for number 1, if we're doing 5 times a half, or a half of 5, or half times 5, it's going to be less than 5. So that means in this case, 5 is going to be larger. Okay, our alligator is going to go ahead and eat the bigger number, or crocodile, or whatever. So just the same, if we look at B, in this case, we're looking at 5 times 2 1/3. Instead of taking the of route, let's look at what we have. We have 5 times 2 1/3, and our rules when we're multiplying fractions is first to multiply the whole numbers together. So 5 times 2, and then we can do 5 times 1/3 if we really want to solve it. But just by looking at 5 times 2, we already know that's going to be 10. So even without doing the second part, we know right away that this equation here is going to be larger than 5. Now really there's a basic rule here. If you take this 5 and multiply them by something bigger than 1, then he's going to end up greater than 5. If you take this 5 and multiply them by something less than 1, like the 1/2 of number 1, he'll be less than 5. And there is one exception here. Of course, there's greater than 1, less than 1, and there's also, what about when it's 1? And of course, anytime you take a number and multiply it by 1, it's going to equal the original number. 5 one time is 5. 100 times 1 is 100. So that's basically what they want you to come away with here, the understanding that take a number, multiplying by something less than 1 will be less than the original number. Multiplying by more than 1 will be greater than the original number. And multiplying anything by 1 will be equal. Okay, so that takes us down to number 2 here. where they want you to create some equivalent fractions for 4/5. And that's kind of what we already did above here, and I'll try to keep both on the screen. We already did the original example. We just found out if we multiply the numerator, the top number, and the denominator, the bottom number, by the same numbers, then we'll get an equivalent fraction. So they already did one example. They multiplied the top, the numerator, and the denominator by 3. They got 12/15. You can pick literally any number you want. We can multiply by 4, you can multiply by 100, as long as you do the same thing to the numerator and denominator, you will get an equivalent fraction. So I'm going to pick 5. So in my head, I know 4 times 5 equals 20. And I know 5 times 5 equals 25. So my equivalent fraction is going to be 20/25. That's what we're looking at there. You'll just be responsible for 2 more options here. And of course, in part A, write 3 fractions that are equivalent to 1. That's going to be any fraction that has the same numerator and same denominator. If there's 5 pieces of pizza and all 5 pieces are left, that means you have the entire pizza left. 5 out of 5. So that's an example there. Lastly, if you look at number 3, I'll try to scroll down here carefully. We have the idea here. They want us to, I believe, let me double check, they can all be rewritten as equivalent fractions with a denominator of 12. What would you multiply each fraction by to make 12ths? So write the fraction for 1 that you would use in each case, and then find the equivalent fraction with a denominator of 12. So you can look in number 1 here. We need to find something to multiply this denominator by to equal 12. And they already did it for us. They said, oh, well, I know 4 times 3 equals 12. And of course, if we multiply the bottom by 4, we also have to multiply the top by 4 to get an equivalent fraction. Anything you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So if we look at number 2, 3/4, now we need to think about what can we multiply our denominator by to get 12. And some of you may notice really quickly, if you can do 3 times 4 to get 12, then you can definitely do 4 times 3 to equal 12. So we're going to do 3/3. We know the denominator will be 12. We'll take a look at the numerator. 3 times 3, that equals 9. So our equivalent fraction is 9/12. Okay, so those are some quick examples. I hope it helps, and we'll probably be talking again soon. Peace.